Hello, beautiful community. Boris Johnson, the post-truth populist and ex-UK Prime Minister, has spoken out in favor of sending troops to Ukraine. We're going to watch the clip, and if there is an interesting way we can react, we'll upload it. Why do I think there is a good chance it'll be interesting? Because it's not just about the issue. It's about the question of what it means for badly intentioned people to get behind good causes. So let's watch and react.
We're going to have a plan for boots on the ground. I may be going in advance of a lot of thinking in the UK at the moment. But if we're going to have a plan for boots on the ground after the war, after Putin has condescended to have a ceasefire, then why not do it now? Just to make this point that...
Just to make this point, by the way, is how boys at Eton College, the public, meaning private, school Boris Johnson went to. I was at school a couple of kilometers away from Eton. I was at a state comprehensive school. But I did debating against the Eton boys, and sometimes went around the country with them doing debating competitions. And that's how you naturally make points at Eton when you debate, irrespective of whether you agree or mean what you're saying. So this is very, very transparently inauthentic communication from Bojo.
It is up to the Ukrainians. I mean, these people wouldn't be there in a war-fighting capacity, right?
To be clear, you're saying that right now that UK military forces and from other European countries should go to Ukraine, to safe parts of Ukraine, to make a statement, to flip that switch, as you said, in Vladimir Putin's head, showing intent.
Yes, I think we're willing to do it in the context of a ceasefire, which of course puts all the initiative, all the power in Putin's hands. Why not do it now? There's no logical reason that I can see why we shouldn't send some peaceful ground forces there to show our support, our constitutional support for a free, independent Ukraine. That this is a political thing. It's about whether Ukraine is a free country or not. If it's a vassal state of Russia, which is what Putin wants, then obviously it's up to Putin to decide who comes to his country. If it's not, then it's up to the Ukrainians.
So let's understand one principle straight away, and that is most of the great collective human achievements in history have been a product of mixed motives. If you take away mixed motives, bad motives, self-serving motives, and you only want motives that you would recognize as benign, you're basically going to get rid of most collective achievements in human history. So you've got to be realistic about that. But while that's true, it's also true that a lot of people acting out of bad motives or mixed motives don't make the world a better place. And it's specifically often true that a lot of people who get behind good causes for bad motives also don't end up helping these good causes. So we've just said two things that pull in opposite directions. And it's important for us to keep both of these two things in mind. If I were to talk about sending Western troops to Ukraine because I believe that was both realistic and good, how would I do that if I were well-intentioned? If I'm, let's say, an ex-Prime Minister of the UK. I do it by trying to influence. I do it by using language strategically and explicitly thinking about what's going to happen as a result of me using that language. Maybe it's going to lead to me having certain conversations. Maybe it's going to lead to certain people changing the way they talk. Maybe it's going to lead to certain people changing the way they act. So if I am making that point, and I believe that point is right and practical, and I'm making it in a well-motivated way, I'm going to be thinking about what it is that is going to be the consequence of my speech practically. But if I don't care about that at all, if I'm, for instance, speaking just to elevate my presence in the informational environment, then I would be using the kind of rounded and kitsch language that Boris Johnson is using. We have a constitutional commitment. Ukraine's a free country. That's different to talk that says this is about our national interest, this is about European security, this is why we've got to do it. So that's one kind of intentionality I would have if I were making that argument benignly, that this fluffy thing transparently doesn't have. There is another kind of intentionality that I would have that the fluffy thing lacks. And that's that I would have genuinely grounded, practical views about what happens when we do that, when we send troops to Ukraine, and what happens after the thing that happens after it happens, and what happens after that, and does that chain of events look positive or negative? If it's negative, can we make it positive? Or is that impossible? These are all thoughts I'd be having. We have a small contingent of troops in Ukraine. Some of them get killed by Russia. What do we do next? Is that a good situation to end up in for the West, or a bad one? Is it a good situation in which to put Ukraine, or is it a bad one? I'd have views about that. I'd be thinking about this. Boris Johnson doesn't give a hoot. Also, he is shy. A lot of badly behaved people are shy. Shyness is not something that just afflicts well-natured people. But Putin, the tyrant in the Kremlin, is actually quite shy too, weirdly enough. And one way I've seen Bojo's shyness come out is when he's interviewed by Ukrainians in Ukraine, and they tell him what a great hero he is. And he is shy because he knows that he has an entrepreneurial relationship with Ukraine as an issue. That if it served him, he'd take a diametrically opposed view. Moreover, he's a Trump supporter. And he's still a Trump supporter. And he thinks Trump is good for Ukraine and is still making that argument in public. Or at least now he's back down to some degree. He's making the argument Trump's nowhere near as bad for Ukraine as people think. So there is then, of course, another kind of fabrication in this space. And that's the fabrication of European leaders. Because European leaders do not actually want to send troops to Ukraine when they say that they want to send troops to Ukraine. Unfortunately, that's a truth that anybody who understands European corridors of power can recognize. But that's not the same as Boris Johnson's manipulation, because Boris Johnson's manipulation is black and white, right? It's clear that he is engaged in an unconstructive, self-serving bit of communication. But when Macron talks about sending troops to Ukraine, it's more complex. Part of what he is doing is trying to galvanize Europe. He's trying to galvanize Europe by saying something that European leaders don't want to do as though they do want to do it, but then trying to use that to create commitment, momentum, and a kind of an awakening from strategic slumbers, because Europe has no strategic grasp, not just of its purposes on the global stage, but even of what it is as a global actor. So it's a kind of a fake galvanization that hopefully might trigger some real galvanization. Another reason to say, there are plenty of reasons to say it, another reason to say it is to say something strong and clear to extract the benefit in domestic politics, without any downsides, because you're committing to something that you believe, at least, that you're not going to do. Now, why do they believe they're not going to do it? They believe they're not going to do it because it's their clear view. It might be wrong, but it's a sincere view that Putin would never allow himself to sign a deal that's then going to allow European troops to be present on Ukrainian territory. Most European leaders believe that. And therefore, they are committing themselves to an eventuality that can't really arise. But whatever you think of that fabrication, and however much you might lament the fact that European leaders are saying they're going to do something while privately hoping the situation will never arise for them to do it, you might not like that, but at least we can have a debate about the pros and cons of that sort of stuff being said, and whether it helps us and whether it helps Ukraine or not. I don't think there is any debate of that kind to be had with what Boris Johnson says. He hasn't thought at all about who he's trying to influence with this, because he's not trying to influence anybody. He hasn't thought through at all the practicalities of sending European troops to Ukraine, because he doesn't care about these practicalities, right? And so in this case, cumulatively, I would say that while Boris Johnson saying this has no impact on whether there are going to be European troops in Ukraine or not, it is generally deleterious for the UK and deleterious for Ukraine. And also deleterious for just trust in institutions in the West, for Boris Johnson to be saying this the way he is saying it, for the reason he is saying it. Now, beautiful community, a quick announcement. I made a video on the main channel yesterday, which is flopping apocalyptically in the algorithm. If you haven't seen it, it's much more worth 8 minutes of your time than this chat was, because it's much more dense, much more concentrated. And it's about 3 psychological effects that Putin's winter war on Ukraine, his attempt to freeze Ukrainians, strives for. The first psychological transformation he strives for is just to descend to Ukrainian sense of the Kremlin as the aggressor and themselves as the victim. Because if by year 5 of war you begin to think of Kremlin attacks on you as a kind of hurricane, as a natural disaster, then it becomes easier to start blaming local authorities or your government for what's happening, and start a process where Ukrainians fight among themselves. That's one aim of Putin's. A second aim of Putin's is to trigger the feeling that endurance is futility, that you can't really outlast the Russians. And the third feeling Putin wants to trigger is that Ukraine has been abandoned by the West, and therefore it's hopeless to fight on, and therefore you make a deal on Russian terms. Now, that hasn't worked for Putin, or at least it's worked only very partially and mostly not worked, because he again continues to underestimate how pissed off people are going to be when they are assailed by an external aggressor. And he thinks that because he still can't come to terms with the fact that Ukraine is a real country. But that's what the video is about. There are some broader takeaways then, a few remarks about the siege of Leningrad, in which Putin's older brother Viktor died. So if you haven't seen it, go over to the main channel, watch it. And also, because I'm now planning to reduce the production quality on the main channel while keeping the quality of what I say at the same high level as it was before. And that may allow me to make more frequent videos. So I'm hoping to, stop with these massive gaps, sometimes 2 months, sometimes 3 months between main channel videos, which dramatically displeases the YouTube algorithm. And that's why we've got a situation where, our historic audience on the main channel was around 250,000 for a couple of years. But this video has been stuck at 20,000 views. So go over there, watch it, give it a boost, and make sure you're subbed on the main channel and you've clicked the bell, because I hope that it's going to be more consistent action there in the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much, beautiful community. Lots of love and talk soon.